The story begins with a young boy named Rio finding himself in a weird white place. He wonders if this is the afterlife, but then a white blonde man walks out of the thick fog and tells him that it isn't the afterlife, but he did unfortunately pass away in an accident. Rio remembers getting yeeted by truck con and asks the guy if he's God, but the blonde says that he's somewhat like an angel. So Rio decides to name him Fake Michael. After that, Michael tells Rio that he will now be reincarnated into another world called Phi, but surprisingly, he hasn't been assigned any mission, so he can choose to live however he wants. Hearing this, Rio says that in that case, he would like to live the slow life. Michael grants this wish and tells him that the world Rio is heading to is called Phi, a place full of magic where only around 20% of humans can actually cast spells. He adds that Rio's most compatible element will be water, and since he asked for a chill lifestyle, his new beginning will be in the forest of Rondo, complete with a ready-made house with a magical barrier to keep monsters out and a food supply stocked enough to last him 2 months. After that, Rio opens his eyes in his new house and walks around to check it out. He finds a magic ice room with lots of meat, a bath, a knife, and a couple of books on monsters, and notices that he can read them even though he has never learned the language of this world. After that, he walks out to try out his magic and gives it a go by casting a water ball spell, and soon realizes that he doesn't really need to say any incantations if he can picture the spell clearly in his mind. After that, he goes to take a bath but realizes that he can only produce room temperature water, so naturally, he tries to start a fire using the classic caveman technique. However, that turns out to be a complete failure, thanks to his tiny noodle arms. Feeling defeated, he decides to use sunlight to start a fire and tries to create ice by imagining water molecules coming together. Digging into the cursed memories of that one chemistry book he probably never opened back on Earth, he channels everything he remembers about hydrogen bonding, and surprisingly, it works. After that, he creates an ice lens and uses it to start a fire for his bath and wonders if he can somehow use his scientific knowledge to create hot water directly as well. The next morning, while having breakfast, he thinks that he will need to polish his skills because once he runs out of food, he will need to go out and hunt monsters. After that, he walks out and starts practicing some offensive magic by throwing a water ball at a tree, but it barely does any damage. He then tries to cast a jet stream spell but ends up being just as disappointing as his ugly face. He remembers Michael's advice that the foundation of magic is imagination and continues to practice these spells for weeks. Once he gets good with them, he tries to create some icicle lances but fails to launch them at his target. Days keep passing by and Rio improves enough to be able to create icicle lance crystals instantly, though they still drop uselessly instead of flying like they should. Deciding it's time for a change of scenery, he crafts a makeshift spear with his knife and heads into the woods to collect some quartz so he can cook his food at night as well. Inside the forest, he stumbles upon some beautiful views, clear flowing water, and even spots quartz stones near the riverbank and feels happy. He says that he will gather some medicinal herbs and head back home, but suddenly a lesser boar jumps out of the bushes and charges at him from behind. Just as the beast is about to flatten him, he remembers how he died once already and decides there's no way he's letting it happen again. He leaps aside just in time. The boar charges once more, but this time Rio quickly forms an ice bond on the ground, making the whole area slick. As the boar slips, it crashes straight into a trap of 16 icicle lances Rio set up on the spot. The icy spikes tear through it, and just like that, our hero scores his first win. After returning, he checks the monster compendium and finds out that the so-called terrifying lesser boar was actually the weakest of all monsters. While flipping through the book, he notices the last 2 pages are marked as a special edition, so he skips the rest and jumps straight to them. One page lists dragons capable of wiping out entire cities. There's even a note warning him to start running if he ever sees one, although it also mentions that escaping might not even be possible. The second page features creatures called Akuma, which the compendium clearly states are not fallen angels. It simply tells him to pray he never encounters one. The next morning, Rio heads out on his second jungle trip, finally leaving behind the worn-out clothes he brought from Earth. This time, he stumbles across some delicious fruits, and just as he starts to enjoy the moment, a bird monster shows up acting like it owns the fruit tree. Rio instantly recalls it as an assassin hawk, a monster that can use air slash, a dangerous form of invisible offensive air magic, though its real threat lies in its razor-sharp beak. While running, Rio realizes he might not be fast enough to escape the monster, so he tries firing water at it but fails miserably. Just as the hawk dives toward him, Rio instinctively throws up an ice shield, which not only blocks the attack but hits the bird with a brutal counter. He quickly tries to follow up with his spear, but the hawk manages to escape with one eye injured. Rio drops to the ground thinking about how his peaceful slow life has taken a far more intense turn than he expected. To make things worse, all that running has left him completely lost, but it ends up bringing him to a stunning lake. There he spots a headless man calmly patting his headless horse. After taking in the bizarre yet oddly majestic sight, Rio eventually finds his way back home. As days go by, he finally masters his long-awaited icicle lance, strong enough to wipe out an enemy in one hit. He also gets into fishing and buffs up his defensive ice barrier magic. On one of his adventures, he heads to the ocean and tries swimming, only to barely escape from a curious octopus. His training pays off with the discovery of new spells like Abrasive Jet, a technique sharp enough to slice through solid rock. One night, after feeling like he has finally gotten a decent grip on his magic, Rio grabs an ice blade and heads out to challenge the headless Dullahan. He questions whether this mysterious figure is even a monster or simply too advanced to be listed in the beginner's compendium. Without much more thought, the two engage in an intense battle, and as expected, our guy ends up losing. Still, he makes it a routine to show up night after night, and over time, Dullahan starts acting more like a coach. The silent mentor even teaches Rio how to properly forge an ice sword and eventually gives him a blade of his own. Rio accepts it without hesitation, treating it like a treasured reward. The next day, while our Mowgli is lunging in the forest, a massive black bird suddenly swoops down. It doesn't take long for Rio to recognize it as the same assassin hawk from before, now evolved and clearly back for revenge. With no other option, he braces himself for a rematch. He throws up 10 layers of ice walls, but the relentless creature smashes through them without pause. He fires off his trusted icicle lance, only to realize the hawk has somehow picked up a magic negation ability straight out of Black Clover. To make things worse, the bird unleashes a thundershock, forcing Rio to finally draw the sword gifted by the Dullahan. The blade slices clean through even magical attacks like air slashes, and with one final move, Rio drives it straight into the hawk's body. He gives the evolved beast the showdown it deserves, then steps back, pulling out his blade and thanking it for the battle that helped him grow stronger. As if the day wasn't already bad enough, things take another wild turn when a massive red dragon drops in for a chat. The dragon lights up upon realizing its telepathy actually works and asks if Rio happened to see a large black bird pass by. Rio nervously blurts out an apology and admits he may have taken it down, assuming it was one of the dragon's minions. To his surprise, the dragon looks impressed instead and even takes note of the sword at Rio's waist, recognizing it as the blade of the Fairy King. Seizing the moment, Rio decides to ask the dragon some long-overdue questions about this world. They end up talking the whole day, bonding over random things until the sun starts to dip behind the trees and the dragon suddenly remembers that his wife is not going to forgive him if he stays out any longer. Just before taking off, the dragon finally introduces himself as Lewin. Watching all this from a distance, Mr. Fake Michael seems very intrigued by the little kid casually befriending ancient dragons. He realizes that Rio has awakened a secret trait, something no one else has possessed since a girl more than 10,000 years ago, and his trait is called Eternal Youth. The next day, Rio starts craving some seafood and makes his way to the sea. There he comes across a wrecked ship that looks like it got caught in a storm. Among the scattered debris, he finds a corpse, which makes him feel a twinge of sorrow. But just then, he hears someone groaning in pain and discovers another person barely clinging to life. Rio brings the man, whose name turns out to be Abel, back to his place. When Abel wakes up, he finds his belongings neatly placed on the table beside him. He steps outside, looking around and wondering out loud where he has ended up. Rio soon follows, visibly relieved that the man survived and showing genuine care. However, Abel becomes slightly guarded when he realizes he couldn't sense Rio's presence at all. He also finds the clothes the kid is wearing a bit strange, but still notes his good manners and chooses to begin with a proper thank you rather than raising any complaints. Rio seems cheerful but ends up apologizing, saying it's a shame Abel was the only one who didn't end up as a corpse. Abel, however, doesn't seem too bothered and explains that the others were smugglers anyway. When he hears Abel's stomach growl, Rio offers to talk over a meal and takes him inside. While eating, Abel learns that Rio doesn't have clothes because he couldn't make thread. When he asks why Rio couldn't just get some from a town, Rio explains that there isn't a town or even a single person living nearby. Impressed by the meal, Abel asks if Rio made it all by himself. Rio then creates water in a jar and reveals that he's a water mage. Hearing this, Abel remarks that almost half the people in the central province can use magic, even though he himself can't. This leaves Rio puzzled, as it contradicts what Mr. Fake Michael had told him earlier about only 20% of people being able to use magic. Abel then asks if Rio can show him the way to the coast, and Rio happily agrees. As they make their way through the jungle, Abel asks if Rio uses a staff. When Rio admits he doesn't have one, Abel's mood dips a little, assuming it is probably because of the rough life he is living. Realizing that Rio would be nearly useless in a fight without a staff, Abel offers to take the lead if any monsters show up. Rio tries to brush it off, but when Abel insists he cannot always be the one being rescued, our guy gives in and lets him take the front. When they finally reach the coast, they discover that the corpses of the smugglers are nowhere to be found. Rio suggests they were either taken by monsters or simply washed away by the tide. Abel quietly points out that he would have ended up the same way if Rio had not stepped in, and tells him to drop the formalities and stop calling him Mr. Rio argues that Abel is older than him, but still agrees, and just like that, the two start to feel more like friends. Abel steps down from the shipwreck and tells our boy that, unfortunately, he couldn't find what he had been searching for. Rio asks what he plans to do now. The redhead says that ideally, he wants to reunite with his allies, and for that, he needs to head to a town called Loon. But he worries he may have drifted far south. Rio admits he has no idea where Loon is, but he's fairly sure that the journey north won't be an easy one. Abel then throws out a pretty selfish request, asking our guy if he can just treat it like a job and tag along on the journey. He's well aware that a mage without his staff would only be a dead weight, but figures Rio might at least be useful as a guide. After a brief pause, Rio replies that he's fine with being the guide and says they'll head out tomorrow since he needs some time to get ready before they leave. Later that night, Rio starts gearing up to head into the jungle, and when Abel questions why he's going so late, our guy simply says the one he wants to say goodbye to only shows up at this hour. Poor Abel starts wondering who that could even be, thinking maybe Rio's off to bid farewell to some ghosts, since there's no way anyone would be out in a jungle like that, or maybe he's heading off to pay respects to a fallen comrade, though in the end he decides it's probably safer not to question whatever weird ritual Rio's up to. Rio reaches the spot and calls out to the Fairy King. He tells him that he'll be away from the forest of Rondo for a while and thanks him for everything he's done. He even asks for a brawl and gives it his all. As a parting gift, the Fairy King pulls a fancy suit out of the water and hands it to him. Rio accepts it with pride. The next day, he wears the suit, prepares himself, and sets off on a journey with Abel. On the way, they come across a lesser boar which Abel takes down easily using a combat skill called Total Impalement. Rio gets impressed and asks what these combat skills are. Abel figures that a mage wouldn't know such things and explains that they are techniques used by people who fight with weapons like swords. The whole day passes on foot, and at night, they rest by the base of a tree trunk. The next morning, they resume their journey. After hearing something nearby, they run into lizard folk. Abel looks a bit concerned, saying they might be a tough opponent in the marsh, so they take a detour through the woods. While walking, Rio tells Abel that the lizard folk seem to be following them, and both get ready for a fight. Abel still worries about how Rio will manage without his staff, but right then, our guy uses his ace, Icicle Lance, and takes out 4 of the lizard folk in one move. Rio tells Abel to get ready since more enemies are on the way, and before long, the two of them wipe out the remaining lizard folk. Once the battle is over, Abel looks at Rio and asks about the spell he just used, confused as to how someone could cast 4 Icicle Lances with a single incantation. Rio simply shrugs it off and then adds that such things are pretty normal when it comes to water magic. He then forms a cup from ice and offers Abel some water before they move on. However, seeing that Rio uses a different incantation this time to summon water makes Abel raise an eyebrow, but our guy brushes it off with a half-baked excuse, claiming Abel must be imagining things. As they continue walking, Abel pulls out a bronze coin and shows it to Rio, who gets surprisingly excited just seeing one. That leads Abel to tell him about the 3 central provinces. Rio perks up after hearing the name Kingdom of Nightly, but immediately pulls a face at the mention of the Dibui Empire, complaining that he'd never want to be called a citizen of a place with such a ridiculous name. Just as the landscape begins to open up, the duo stumbles upon a rock golem nest. Rio's biggest concern, however, is why the golem doesn't look humanoid like he always imagined. Abel decides to charge in and uses his Total Impalement skill to pierce a hole straight through the golem, but the thing regenerates instantly and pushes back hard. Rio then says he wants to try a new spell, and without much fanfare, he turns his ice wall into a massive cube that comes crashing down, smashing the golem entirely. Abel stares in confusion because from what he knows, battles like these aren't supposed to be that easy, yet Rio keeps making it look effortless. Once the fight ends, they find a massive yellow magic stone, and judging from its appearance, Abel guesses the monster must have wiped out everything in the area. Rio says he would have liked to collect the stones from the other golems too, but unfortunately, he crushed them all under his ice cubes. A while later, the duo comes across a giant hippo-like creature, and the redhead calls it a behemoth. Rio wonders if they should take it down, but Abel immediately shoots down the idea. Just then, a bunch of wyverns show up, and instead of panicking, Rio lights up like he just scored front row seats to a monster brawl. The two even place bets on who's going to win, and the behemoth comes out on top with a deafening roar that Rio explains as magic negation. Later that night, while the two are camping out, Rio teases Abel about wanting to see round 2 between him and the behemoth. Abel shuts him down right away, calling the whole idea ridiculous. Abel brings up the magic negation again, saying he's only ever heard of traps with that kind of effect inside dungeons. The word dungeon instantly catches Rio's interest, and he starts accusing Abel of hiding all the fun details, asking if there's more he hasn't been told. Abel then asks if Rio knows anything about elves and dwarves, and the way he describes them perfectly matches what Rio already knows. The next morning, as they set off again, Rio mentions that once they get through the mountains, they'll reach human territory. That makes Abel pause for a second and ask how Rio knows all that. The truth is, the Red Dragon told him, but instead of explaining that, Rio waves it off and calls the source of his knowledge something beyond human understanding. And somehow, Abel just accepts it without pushing further. While the two are peacefully walking, a giant griffin suddenly appears, scaring them so badly it's like they both wet their pants. Rio somehow activates every brain cell at once and tosses a piece of meat into the sky, telling Abel to do the same. The griffin accepts the offering and flies off, making it feel like the beast was just a toll officer checking for payment. The two let out a huge sigh of relief, knowing they wouldn't have lived to tell the tale if the toll collector found them sus. Abel argues that something's definitely wrong with this place since no human has reported seeing griffins or behemoths for centuries. Rio just shrugs it off, saying those humans probably weren't trying hard enough. As they move forward, they come across a group of wyverns enjoying their meal. Abel points out that it would take at least 20 seasoned adventurers to handle this, and even then, there'd be major casualties. But Rio argues that since this is clearly their territory, they'd have to deal with them eventually, whether now or later. He manages to convince Abel to fight, and after pinning the creatures down with his icicles, he tells Abel to finish them off, which he does. When more wyverns show up, Rio wipes them out like it's nothing. Abel just stands there, trying to wrap his head around how they pulled that off and even managed to collect some massive green magic stones. But before they can celebrate, another wave of wyverns appears, looking for revenge, and this time it's Abel who's eager to start the fight, clearly turning into a combat junkie thanks to Rio's influence. As the duo finally makes it out of the monstrous mountain range, Abel wonders aloud where they've ended up, pointing out that they've come pretty far north. Rio gives a tired but honest reply, saying anywhere outside the Dibule Empire is good enough for him. Abel then reassures him, explaining that the Empire lies even further north than where they're headed now. Just then, Rio spots a road cutting from east to west. As they walk toward it, Abel glances back at the looming mountains with a hint of unease. He then nods toward the path leading west, confidently stating that it should take them to the town of Kaladi. The two begin dreaming out loud about finding an actual bed to rest in, and Rio enthusiastically recommends the local food, claiming it's worth the journey on its own. That night, the two show up at the guild, where Abel tells our boy he should go ahead and register himself since the guild card can definitely come in handy and even waive his entry fee. He reminds Rio how he generously paid a silver coin on his behalf and acted as his guarantor. Rio playfully asks if that was part of some shady scheme where Abel would try to set him up as his servant. Abel finds such a cheap trick way below his standards. After their little mockery session ends, Abel informs him about the other perks of registering, like being able to sell magic stones and monster materials at better rates. The only other way would be to go around searching for an alchemist to sell one. Just then, the waitress brings in a curry rice dish. Rio recalls the many Isekai stories he had read where the hero had to break his back just to eat curry, but here he is eating it without even trying. The moment he takes a spoonful of curry into his mouth, our boy goes wild and even asks for seconds. The next day, while leaving for Loon, Rio starts his victim act again, accusing Abel of hiding yet another secret from him. He acts like some prince demanding to know if there is more. Rio wants to know about the sweets now, and Abel just plays along. Soon after, the duo arrives at the town of Loon, where a guard named Nimmer gets super excited to see his lost comrade. Abel gives Rio the credit for making it back alive, and Nimmer personally thanks our boy. Abel also pays the entry fee for Rio, and the two head straight to the guild. Abel tells him that he can even rank up his registration because he is with him. When our boy asks what that means, Abel explains that usually someone starts at F rank, but if they have the backing of someone above B rank, they can jump up to D rank. Rio tells the guy that he is proud of him since he must be above B rank. Abel then talks about how having a high rank comes with its perks like getting better paying jobs, while he also points out that with the amount of gems Rio collected, money won't be an issue for him anytime soon. In fact, he even worries that if they tried to sell all of them at once, it could crash the market price. Still, Abel stays optimistic, saying the guild master should be smart enough to realize that on his own. As soon as the two step into the guild, the receptionist practically yells Abel's name, and the entire place lights up with excitement at the sight of him alive. Everyone rushes to him like he's some sort of celebrity. Watching the redhead surrounded by familiar faces, Rio smiles quietly and walks out, thinking he might just be getting in the way. Outside, the only elf in the city walks past, dressed in a greenish outfit, and immediately notices the robe Rio's wearing. When he asks if something's wrong, she simply says she was just admiring the remarkable robe, calling him an interesting person before politely excusing herself, saying there's somewhere else she needs to be and hoping they'll meet again. As she disappears down the street, the guild door swings open and Abel comes out looking for Rio. He quickly drags him back inside and introduces him to everyone, calling him his savior and announcing that he'll be registering as an adventurer. The crowd welcomes him warmly, thanking the boy for saving their friend and for taking care of him. Abel then takes our guy straight to the receptionist, asking her to register him at D rank under his endorsement. This clearly catches her off guard since no one from the Crimson Sword has ever personally endorsed anyone before. So this little move alone speaks volumes about how valuable Rio is. While the receptionist seems to get the message, she still brings up the usual procedure, saying they will have to test him first to check his capabilities. Abel then asks to speak with the guild master to talk about this and a few other things, so the receptionist arranges it and tells them to wait in the meeting room. The moment news hits that Abel is alive, the guild master comes bolting in, probably thinking some ghost or knockoff version of Abel is wandering around trying to cause drama. But the second he lays eyes on the real deal, the man drops to his knees. Abel rushes to help him up while apologizing for making the poor old man worry like that. The guildmaster isn't having it though, going off about how he has been through absolute hell ever since he found out Abel had gone missing. Eventually, his eyes drift over to our guy, and he wants to know who this magician is. Abel does the honors again, introducing his savior one more time, and the guildmaster happily introduces himself as Huma Glass, although right now he's looking more like a tired McDonald's shift manager who's had a long day. When he thanks our boy, Rio just says he happened to be in the right place at the right time. Abel then jumps into business mode and starts discussing Rio's rank endorsement with Hugh. When the old man asks if they have any proof, Abel admits it's a fair question, but also makes it pretty clear that Rio is way stronger than him. Just then, Abel casually drops all the monster stones onto the table, telling the guild master they picked these up from creatures they defeated along the way. Mr. McGlass takes a second to actually process what he is looking at before realizing these are wyvern stones, and judging by the amount, they would have needed a full-blown army to take down that many. The redhead says he has something even scarier to reveal, explaining that they hunted those wyverns south of the Malefic Mountains. That is when Abel finally lets it slip that the mountain range they had crossed was none other than the Malefic Range. And when Rio points out that it sounds like the kind of name made specifically to tell people not to go there, the guild master confirms it, saying no one has ever made it out alive from that place. Most people would not even go near the area unless they absolutely had to. Abel then argues that this should be more than enough to bump Rio's rank up, and the guild master just lifts his hands in surrender, realizing there is no point in testing someone who has already proven they are completely beyond what the guild can measure. Just then, Abel's teammates show up. He rushes to the door, apologizing for making them worry. While Abel gets the whole room to himself for a much-needed reunion with Lynn, Rhea, and Warren, and the guildmaster asks the receptionist, Nina, to bring over the necessary registration materials to the office. As Rio leaves the room, Abel calls out to him and asks him to wait at the reception, since there's a place he wants to take him afterward. The guildmaster then leads our boy into his office. When Rio hesitantly brings up the topic of a rank up, the old man assures him that even though Abel is a prodigy, he knows full well that not even Abel could take down a whole swarm of wyverns on his own. When he pats Rio on the shoulder, he realizes that the kid has one hell of a physique for someone who's supposed to be a mage. Just then, Nana returns with the registration forms and gets started. She formally introduces herself as a clerk of the Lewd Adventurers Guild and begins the interview. She asks a few basic questions and lets him know that after registration, he'll be eligible to stay in the guild lodgings for up to 300 days. When she finds out that he's never been to a dungeon before, she recommends the guild's monthly introductory dungeon course and encourages him to join it. Rio shows a surprising amount of interest, and after wrapping up the interview, she asks him to place his hand on the crystal to complete the process. Surprisingly, it doesn't explode or shatter like in those anime scenes with overpowered isekai characters. The registration goes smoothly, and our boy finally receives his official guild card. After the two leave, the guild master lets out a deep breath, finally able to relax a little now that Abel is back. With his workload having piled up ever since the kid disappeared, the old man genuinely feels relieved and grateful to Rio for bringing him back, quietly deciding that he owes the boy one. Meanwhile, after getting himself registered, Rio reunites with Abel, who drags him along to collect his reward for the escort mission. Along the way, Abel offers to buy him some proper clothes and maybe even a staff. Rio, still unsure why he would need his staff, asks about it, and Abel casually replies that he figured all magicians use one. Rio shrugs and explains that he is perfectly fine using magic without one, and even drops the bomb that he uses his sword when fighting up close. This catches Abel off guard since he has never seen Rio carrying a sword. Rio then pulls out his blade, which looks more like a large knife to Abel. Rio starts asking Abel about some of the basics of this world, and what he learns leaves him raising eyebrows. The days of the week, the hours in a day, and even how they measure things in centimeters, it is all exactly the same as on Earth. With curry already being a thing here, this just feels too specific to be random. Putting it all together, Rio concludes that someone else must have been ice cake to this world long before him. Once they are done with shopping, Abel brings him along to the party being held to celebrate his return. The next morning, while Nana shows Abel where he'll be staying, she complains that the place feels sluggish. Apparently, some guy named Rod didn't want Rio to leave the party, since he considered Abel a brother and felt heavily indebted to Rio. Soon after, Rio is guided to room number 15, where he'll be bunking with two other boys around his age. The energetic one is Nils, while the quiet blonde is named Ito. As Nina heads out, Nils can't stop talking about matters of the heart and seems to have a serious crush on her. Ito tells him flatly that he doesn't stand a chance, not with all the competition out there. But Nils stays confident, claiming it's every guy's dream to make it big and win over a beautiful woman. Ito just ignores the guy's loud dreaming and turns to Rio, asking him to keep things informal between them. Just then, Nina returns and introduces a new roommate named Ammon, who looks a bit younger than the rest. Before leaving again, she tells Rio to be ready the next day along with Ammon, since both of them are scheduled for that dungeon training session. Meanwhile, Abel is having a tough time convincing the team about Rio's abilities. Lynn argues that Ice Wall is clearly a water spell, but it's so thin that even a basic air slash should be enough to shatter it. She says making it thicker and dropping it on golems sounds more like something straight out of a fairy tale. As Lynn keeps making a fuss, Ria tries to calm her down, reminding her that Abel is just describing what he saw. Though Lynn eventually backs off, she still refuses to believe that taking down wyverns with ice spears is possible, especially since those creatures are protected by wind barriers. At that point, Ria mentions that the only mage ever known to pull off feats like the ones Abel described was the legendary Inferno magician. She admits Rio seems like a rare find, but also shares her concern that if someone like him ever sided with the Dibui Empire, they'd be finished. Abel, however, is confident that Rio would never do that. When asked why, he simply says the guy hates the very name of Dibui, which sounds pretty sus to his team. Rio and the new kid Ammon attend their first dungeoneering course together, and after 5 days of lectures, the professor finally wraps up the theoretical part. With that done, it's time for hands-on experience, so he announces that they'll be visiting the first layer of a real dungeon. Ammon immediately starts panicking, but Rio tells him to relax, warning that stressing out this early will just wear him out before noon even hits. Before they head out, the professor opens the floor for questions and Rio raises his hand. He asks whether it's possible to instantly teleport to a dungeon lair once it has been cleared. The question, clearly inspired by his knowledge from Isekai anime, grabs everyone's attention. The professor is a little surprised but genuinely impressed that Rio knows such a detail. Unfortunately, he explains that this particular feature is only rumored to exist in the dungeons located in the southern provinces. The one in Lune sadly doesn't offer anything like that. Ammon turns to our boy, clearly impressed, and admits he's surprised Rio knew all that, even saying he really does deserve that early bird D rank. Once everything is in order, the professor leads the class to the edge of the dungeon while giving them a bit of history. He explains how the entire city of Lune was originally built around this dungeon, and that every few years the monster population inside swells dramatically. This phenomenon is known as the Great Tidal Bore. During those times, the creatures reach the surface layer, which is why massive double walls were constructed to keep them from breaking out and causing chaos in the city. Ammon seems a little concerned, but the professor reassures him that the tidal bore only happens once every few years and the next one isn't expected anytime soon, so there's no need for the rookies to worry. As they approach the entrance, the professor points out a guild counter stationed right at the beginning of the dungeon and explains that every adventurer has to register their name and time of entry before heading in. Rio notices his roommate struggling and tells him to take deep breaths. Once they're inside, the professor informs the students that they're free to explore on their own since there aren't any strong monsters nearby. As our duo moves ahead, Rio suddenly senses a monster and tells Amon to get ready, saying he'll hold it down with magic so Amon can strike. A moment later, a soldier ant appears, and Rio quickly explains that the easiest way to deal with it is to aim for the base of its neck. He then fakes an incantation and fires 8 icicle lances, pinning the creature in place and giving Amon the perfect chance to finish it off without trouble. Rio takes a moment to explain how to extract the magic stone from the monster's body, and the two return afterward to celebrate their first expedition and successful hunt. That night, the roommates throw a small party where Ito compliments them for taking down an entire soldier ant on their first try. Ammon humbly admits he only managed to kill it because Rio had already immobilized it, but Rio casually brushes it off and chooses to let Ammon take the credit. Ito then asks what their plans are for the next day, and Ammon quickly says he's ready to head back into the dungeon. Rio agrees to join him again, but mentions he plans on reaching the 3rd floor this time. The group begins to wonder why a soldier ant appeared on the 1st floor when there are usually only weak monsters like bats around. Ito mentions that there have been several reports of similar sightings on the 1st and 2nd floors in recent months, which makes Rio question what stronger monsters are even doing down there. Just then, Abel makes a flashy entrance and explains that soldier ants can actually drill their way into the upper floors. Abel then properly introduces himself to Rio's roommates and mocks Rio, claiming the guy clearly has some serious personality issues, asking them to look after him. Rio just asks if he is that eager to pick a fight. Meanwhile, Rio's friends recognize Abel from the Crimson Dragon and almost wet their pants from the pressure. Nils stands up straight, introducing himself as a swordsman and explaining how, as an F-ranked adventurer, he sees Abel as a hero. He's honored to shake hands with him, which Abel humbly accepts while advising him to work hard, but within reason. Rio then asks Abel why he's up so late poking around like this, to which Abel explains that the quest his party took ended up being longer than expected. Just then, Abel's party shows up and complains that he is slacking off instead of reporting to the guild. Abel claims he was simply fulfilling his duty as a veteran to guide the newbies. Lynn then tells the big guy Warren to deal with him, and Warren lifts Abel onto his shoulder and carries him off like some dead weight. Lynn walks up to our boy and stares straight into his eyes before rudely turning and walking away. Rhea quickly apologizes for the sudden intrusion, saying they needed their leader urgently. As the Crimson Dragon squad walks off toward the reception, Rhea starts arguing with Lynn about basic manners and tells her to stop going around staring at guys like that. Lynn replies that if Rio really is that high-five mage, and how could she not be interested in him? Abel tries to act cool and tells the girls they'll soon witness the power of his savior, but the team just shuts him up on the spot. The next morning, Eamon gets up early and is practically sprinting toward the dungeon, trying to wear himself out before they even arrive. Rio tells him to slow down a little. Once inside the dungeon, the two of them face off against a group of wolves, which they take down without much trouble, and Eamon seems to gain some confidence. While they rest, Rio points out that Eamon's fighting style looks a bit like Abel's. Eamon says he picked it up from someone, and that it might be a style from the Hugh school, though he is not too sure. Rio lifts his spirits, saying he will do great once he gets the hang of things, and even compares him to Obel. Eamon then notes that Rio himself is quite skilled with the sword despite being a magician. Rio explains that he was lucky enough to have a mentor who practiced with him long ago, though he is not sure if his style is all that common. He then gives the rookies some tips on staying consistent like Abel and on how to manage his stamina, and Eamon seems fired up by the advice. The next day, Rio plans to take a break from the dungeon and heads to the library, a place that actually feels like where he belongs. The librarian shows him around while giving advice on where to begin. As our boy steps outside, sudden darkness surrounds him and he quickly realizes it's an eclipse. Right then, a powerful fire attack hits him from behind, but Rio reacts fast and uses his shield to block the damage. A demi-human appears, and judging by the look, Rio believes it's an Akuma, something he read about in the advanced compendium back at his hut. He figures she's probably on par with a behemoth or a Gryphon and considers making a run for it. But the Akuma attacks before he gets the chance. Rio manages well enough at first, but she eventually overpowers him. She seems impressed that he can handle her hellfire, but what throws her off is how he displaced the wind lance instead of getting impaled. Just then, she notices the robe he's wearing from the Fairy King and draws her blade, deciding to go all out. Rio draws his own and holds his ground against her. As the eclipse fades, their fight grows intense and Rio is pushed into a defensive stance just to keep her away. The woman finds it hard to believe the Fairy King would trust the boy with everything, including his blade, and demands to know who he really is. She then starts casting a fire spell, but before she can even finish pulling it off, Rio shuts it down using his ice magic, sending the lady into a spiral as she wonders how he could possibly be that fast. She throws everything she's got into trying to make our boy bite the dust, but Rio manages to keep up by firing off sword strikes and magic attacks at the same time. His magic finally lands a solid hit, burning through part of her skin, and Rio wastes no time leaping at her to push into the final phase. However, the moment he clashes with her blade, he realizes she's healing at a ridiculous speed, and in the next instant, he finds himself slammed straight into a wall. She then pulls out her Ace Fire spell, fully prepared to end it, but suddenly notices water splashing everywhere. The moment a drop lands on her, it turns out to be scalding hot, and the pain makes her scream out loud. This only fuels her rage, but just as she's about to come at our boy again, she pauses and says she's out of time now, with the eclipse nearly over, and admits she can't even remember the last time she enjoyed herself this much. She calls our boy entertaining, though Rio clearly has no interest in keeping the conversation going, making it obvious he didn't enjoy any part of the fight. She rambles about some cloister being a special case and introduces herself as Leonor Iraca Albuquerque blah blah, before asking who he is. Our boy gives her his name and calls her an Akuma, which catches her attention as she wonders how a human could possibly know about them. She complains that she should have finished him off while she had the time, then admits it probably wouldn't have been possible with the time limit still in effect. As she turns to leave, she insists they'll meet again, while Rio silently hopes their paths never cross again. She throws one last challenge his way, claiming his life now belongs to her and he isn't allowed to die by anyone else's hand, promising she'll return even stronger. Rio lets out a sigh and realizes that if it weren't for the robe, there would be a hole in his left shoulder by now. With his head pounding, he decides to pick up a few books from the library after withdrawing some money. When he checks his account, he finds a fortune sitting there and wonders just how much he earned from the wyvern stones. Relieved that money won't be a problem anymore, he heads home only to find the place empty. As he walks over to the window, he sees his friends being ambushed by the Dan guy and his party. Dan starts arguing with Rio's friends, asking if monsters are supposed to announce their attacks beforehand, and Rio fires back, wondering if Dan's actually ready to suffer the same fate. In no time, Rio takes down the whole bunch, hitting them hard enough to make them want to cry for their mommy. He then turns to his priest friend and hands him a potion first, so he can help the others recover. Later, while taking a bath, Ito starts healing Rio and wonders who could possibly have the strength to land a blow like that on someone this tough. When all of his buddies ask who it was, Rio brushes it off and says he'll tell them another day. He recalls how that Leonor Iraca Albuquerque character mentioned something about us, which clearly means there are more out there like her. But for now, Rio decides not to stress his small brain with all that heavy thinking and simply relaxes in the hot bath. The next day, Amon returns to the dungeon with Mills and Ito by his side. The three head straight to the 5th layer, where Amon takes position at the front and brings down an archer goblin. After he finishes off the monster, Ito uses lesser heal on him and treats the small wound. Ito then argues that goblin archers should not even be showing up on the 5th layer, and something about it feels strange. Nils follows up by sharing something he learned from Abel, saying that survival should always be their top priority. He then suggests they return to the surface and divide their earnings into 3 equal parts. As they begin the walk back, Ammon finds himself missing Ryu during the venture, though Ito tries to convince him that they should form a party with members of similar skill levels so that everyone can contribute fairly and grow stronger together. Meanwhile, Ryu has traveled outside the city to practice on his own. He thinks back to the incredible magic Leonor had used and realizes that conjuring speed was the only area where he could match the Akuma. He decides to work on his weaknesses and turn them into strengths so that he is ready the next time they face each other. Ryu also feels a tinge of jealousy toward the creature, thinking about how she instantly closed in and appeared right in front of him. He wonders if that was a real example of wind magic and begins to imagine creating something similar using water magic. The first spell that comes to mind is Water Jet, so he decides to try it out. Ryu casts an ice bomb in front of him and steps onto it, then pictures 256 water jets blasting from behind to launch him forward at high speed. However, the attempt fails badly. He calls it a day and wonders if using over 1,000 jets could have made a difference. As he finishes his training, he decides to head to the library and search for knowledge related to the Akuma and alchemy. As the story progresses, Lynn is already sitting inside the library going through forbidden spellbooks. Even here, she fails to find any magic capable of forming a thick ice wall midair or the ice spears Abel once told her about. She gives up as she gets up, thinking that not even her master Hilarion would be able to handle spells like those, and if anyone could, it would have to be someone like the Inferno Magician of the Empire. Just then, Sarah appears and comments that it feels strange to find Lynn in a place like this. Lynn replies that she came to look something up, then asks if Sarah had been away from Loon on a quest for royal duties. Sarah tells her she has just returned from her mission, and makes an excuse and leaves, saying an envoy is already waiting for her. In the meantime, the trio arrives at the guild and heads straight to the reception desk, where Nina looks surprised to see them come back so soon. While Nils fails to get proper word out because of his crush on Mina, Ito shows her the magic crystals they gathered, which makes her realize they came from goblin archers who should not be on the 5th layer. She quickly runs off to inform the guild master and also puts up a notice on the guild wall, thanking the 3 for the valuable information. As Nine explains everything to Hugh, he immediately senses the danger, knowing that such monsters usually appear only after the 10th layer. He He asks Mina how many B-rank parties are currently available, and she tells him there are only Crimson Sword and White Brigade. The guild leader then asks her to call both of them at once. Soon after, Crimson Sword arrives at the guild, and Abel does not look pleased when he hears that the White Brigade is also there. They enter Hugh's office, and by the time they get inside, the White Brigade is already waiting. Their leader, Phelps, warmly greets Abel, and Abel returns the greeting. Hugh McGlass wastes no time and gets straight to the point. He quickly thanks both parties for responding to his request, then brings up the report about the goblin archers. Abel asks if the information is reliable, and Mr. McGlass explains that the trio returned with the crystals as proof. The guild leader then informs them that their task will be to enter the dungeon and check for any signs of the great tidal bore, which refers to the explosive growth of monster populations inside the dungeon. Mr. McGlass explains that the last one happened around 10 years ago, and the recent signs they have received might be enough to confirm that another one is approaching. He offers them a generous reward for verifying this and shares all of his plans, even mentioning that he has already notified the Lord about the situation. The guild leader makes it clear that he does not intend to treat this lightly and asks both parties to head out by the next morning. Mr. Hugh also informs them that he has issued a notice to temporarily close the dungeon. Both groups quickly rise from their seats and accept the request. The next morning, Ryu wakes up early and heads out while the others are still getting out of bed. He mentions that he plans to visit the north side of the library, hoping to find material more advanced than what is available on the south side. Ammon points out that there are forbidden texts available there as well, but Ito reminds them that Ryu would need to be at least B-ranked to gain access to those. After they wish him good luck, Ryu makes his way toward the library, and as he climbs the stairs, he comes across Sarah standing there reading a book. Meanwhile, the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade gather near the dungeon gate. When Abel asks Phelps why he has brought only 20 adventurers, Phelps explains that he selected only those ranked above C, which makes up half of the brigade. Abel considers it a wise choice and nods in agreement. Just as the guild master is about to open the dungeon gate, Abel suddenly stops him, sensing an unusual presence from within. He then asks Lynn to confirm it using her wind magic. Lynn casts a wind spell called Probe and reveals that there are well over a few hundred monsters waiting near the entrance, which is more than enough to confirm that the great tidal bore has already begun. The guild master immediately orders everyone to fetch the knights and alert the entire area. An emergency quest is posted at the guild, and everyone quickly rushes off to fulfill their roles. Back to our hero, Sarah seems pleased to see him again. She asks if he is a local adventurer, then properly introduces herself, saying she had a feeling they would meet again. She follows up by asking what he is doing at the library, and Ryu almost lets slip that he is looking for books on the Akuma, but quickly changes his answer to alchemy, explaining that he wants to eventually create a golem. The girl replies that it is quite an ambition, and though she cannot think of any such book nearby, she asks him to walk with her, as she might have something that could guide him. As he follows her, Sarah asks if he enjoys reading, and Ryu tells her just how much he loves books, saying that since he has been reading for a long time, he feels a bit nostalgic whenever he visits this place. He then asks if she is an elf and whether she is the only one in town. Sarah explains that she is the sole member of a B-rank party called the Wind, and that she's a bit unusual since elves do not usually stay in human settlements, but she thinks it is a good thing she did, because that is how she got to meet Ryu. While Ryu and Sarah peacefully enjoy their conversation in the library, chaos begins to spread through the city as crowds gather in a circle around the dungeon and wait for the monsters to emerge. The dungeon doors are slammed open, and what appears next is a swarm of mutated goblins. The guild leader immediately orders everyone to attack with arrows and spells, but the goblins keep charging forward without slowing down. Watching the knights join the fight brings a wave of relief to Abel as he realizes they are the Margrave's Loon Knights. Carl remarks that he is glad he had a meeting with Commander Nivelle earlier, which allowed them to prepare in time. However, as he watches the massive wave of goblins pouring out, Hugh starts to grow anxious, knowing that the last time was nowhere near this serious. As the battle continues, the leaders of the two guild parties do an excellent job of coordinating everyone. Even so, the situation grows dire when Rhea points out that they have already run out of arrows. Nils quickly brings in a new supply and also delivers a message from Hugh to Abel, telling him that there should be a large goblin monster hiding behind the fodder, and he wants the Crimson Sword to take it down. Everyone keeps fighting until dawn, and by then most of the goblins are wiped out. The guild leader quickly orders the two B-rank parties to get into position and defend the wall against the giant monster approaching from the back. The two teams move in perfect sync and easily tear through the final wave before stepping up to face what they assume is the last threat, a single goblin general. But right then, three of them show up instead, which clearly signals that the final boss is going to be a goblin king. Abel calmly shares his plan that he and Phelps will take on two of the generals while Rhea and Shenna will handle the third. He hopes they can end the fight before the king arrives. The team quickly gains the upper hand against the generals, but just before they let their guard down, Abel suddenly shouts for everyone to get down. A violent air slash tears across the battlefield, blowing up the 3 goblin generals and sending them flying with a single swing from the Goblin King. Abel is stunned that such power came from just one casual motion of an arm, and even more shocked that the king willingly sacrificed his own men. Wasting no time, Abel rushes in with Phelps and strikes using his flawless shadow sword skill, followed by a royal impalement, but even that fails to finish the beast. Phelps starts to panic, but Abel calls out to Lynn to use her bullet rain. Luckily, his plan works, and the attack rains down perfectly, bringing the Goblin King to his knees, finally ending the chaos. Back at the surface, Sarah and our boy remain completely unaware of the fight happening. They say goodbye after spending a pleasant evening together, with no clue about the storm that had just passed. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.